He said he was ready to be a father again, that the past was behind him, that nothing else mattered but his kids. Then his own mother stood up in court and told the judge she didn't believe him. She told them about the lies, the money he took from her, the mess he'd made of his life, and why no child should be left in his care. That testimony crushed everything. And a few moments later, she was lying in a pool of blood. Why would a grown man kill the woman who raised him? Just for speaking the truth? Why would a mother go that far to protect the children of her son? The answers were waiting inside a locked house, a rushed cleanup, and a welfare check that came just in time. Jacob Reed was a man many in his community admired. He stood tall behind a lectern 3 times a week, wore crisp shirts, and spoke with the kind of conviction that made people believe he had it all together. But the truth was, Jacob's life was far from the image he projected. Outside the church, he was buried in gambling debts, owing money to people he never mentioned, and taking cash advances against things he didn't own outright. He had borrowed from friends, congregants, and even elderly church members who trusted his word without paperwork. Most of the money was never seen again. Then there were the women. Investigators would later uncover phone records, cash transfers, and message logs tying Jacob to over 10 women within his church alone. The church had barely 50 women in total. Some relationships lasted weeks, others days, but they all followed the same pattern: attention, flattery, secrecy, and denial. Jacob had built a habit out of playing with people's loyalty, cloaked behind prayer meetings and counseling sessions. His marriage had been crumbling long before the split. Yvette, his ex-wife, tried to hold the family together for years. She forgave him after the first affair and the second, even when the evidence sat right in front of her. She tried private counseling. She tried prayer. She tried silence. But Jacob never stopped. The promises to change were routine, almost rehearsed. Yvette Reed had known Jacob since she was 19. Back then, he was just a confident young man with a growing influence in local church circles. He had vision, presence, and ambition. By the time they married, his congregation had doubled, and people were already referring to her as First Lady. But what looked like elevation from the outside felt more like quiet suffocation on the inside. For years, Yvette played her role. She handled women's fellowships, children's ministries, and weekly bulletins. She smiled at Jacob's side. She welcomed the same women he was secretly texting, calling them sisters, while privately trying to convince herself it was just in her head. Even after catching him the first time, she stayed. So did the second time. But with every apology came a new secret, and over time, she realized the man she married was never going to change. What wore her down most wasn't just the infidelity, it was the instability. Jacob's gambling spiraled fast and early. She started noticing bounced checks, loan notices, and empty envelopes where money had been set aside for school fees. He pawned small household items when no one was home. She'd find receipts that didn't match his stories. And when she asked questions, he'd deflect with sermons or emotional guilt. But nothing compared to the moment that broke her. That afternoon, when she came home early and walked into the living room, her daughter was sitting on the couch, frozen. Jacob was standing a few feet away, panicked, with a look she'd never seen before. Nothing had happened yet, but the moment was enough. Enough to see where things could go. Enough to decide there would be no next time. Yvette didn't scream. She didn't wait. She packed a bag, called a family friend, and left with both kids. That was the last day Jacob saw his family inside that house. Over the months that followed, she filed for divorce quietly, changed schools for the kids, and moved in with a relative. She documented everything: financial instability, infidelity, emotional volatility. She didn't care what the community thought. She knew what she saw, and she wasn't about to gamble with her children's safety. When she filed for full custody, she knew the battle wouldn't be easy. Jacob still had influence, and she expected him to fight. What she didn't expect was who would stand with her: Jacob's own mother. The custody filing landed like a brick. Jacob Reed hadn't expected Yvette to go that far. For all her quiet strength, she had rarely stood up to him in public. But this time, she came with lawyers, documented patterns, and clear intentions. She wasn't just trying to get her children away. She was trying to make sure he never had access to them again. The case opened in Fulton County Family Court. Yvette's petition listed multiple grounds: financial instability, compulsive gambling, ongoing moral misconduct, and unsafe behavior in the home. Included in her evidence were bank records showing irregular withdrawals, messages exchanged with multiple women from the church, and written statements from a therapist who had seen the children after the separation. She didn't pursue criminal allegations, but her position was firm. Jacob was not a safe or stable parent. Jacob's response was denial. He painted himself as a man trying to rebuild. He claimed he had slipped, yes, but had already begun counseling. He submitted a church letter of character signed by one of his board members and suggested that Yvette was acting out of revenge, not concern. But his defense was thin. Every claim he made, Yvette countered with documentation. Every deflection, her attorneys answered with facts. The judge ordered a psychological evaluation. Both parties were assessed. Jacob's results were not made public, but according to internal sources later quoted in court records, concerns were raised about impulse control and entitlement patterns inconsistent with stable parental behavior. Still, the case remained contested. Jacob wanted partial custody. He argued for weekends or supervised visitation. He said the children needed their father, but the court was unconvinced. Then came the turning point. The witness no one expected: Martha Reed. Martha Reed had stayed silent for years. She defended Jacob when people whispered about his debts. She stood by him when Yvette left. She gave him money, excuses, and second chances, until she couldn't anymore. Her decision to testify wasn't made lightly. She had wrestled with it for weeks before the hearing. But when she saw the court documents, when she heard the details Yvette presented, and when she looked at the faces of her grandchildren in a printed photo submitted into evidence, something shifted. It was no longer about loyalty to a son. It was about protecting the only people left in the family who hadn't made a mess of their lives. She didn't consult Jacob. She didn't tell Yvette. She quietly informed the court that she had more to say and made arrangements to appear on the final day of witness statements. Her testimony was brief, but it broke everything. She confirmed Jacob's gambling habit, said she had loaned him money over a dozen times in the last 4 years. She mentioned specific amounts: $2,000, $5,000, even a check for $10,000 she wrote from her savings account under the belief it was for ministry equipment. When she asked about repayments, he always said, soon. But the money never came back. Martha told the judge she no longer believed Jacob was honest about anything related to his finances, his recovery, or his parenting. And she said if those children ended up alone with him again, she feared they'd be raised in an environment where no one told the truth. What the courtroom didn't know was that just days before giving that testimony, Martha had taken one final step. She rewrote her will. She did it quietly, with a local attorney. No dramatic meeting, no announcement. Just one quiet visit where she signed away her estate to her second son, Everett, a soft-spoken accountant who kept his distance from the family chaos. In her private notes, she stated clearly, "Jacob has lost my trust. I no longer believe he is capable of managing anything I leave behind. It wasn't revenge. It was closure." Martha left the courthouse beside her longtime friend, Annette Hightower. They didn't say much on the way to the parking lot. Martha was calm. She said she felt relieved, like she'd finally done something right after years of avoiding the truth. She was supposed to stop by the pharmacy. But halfway home, she told Annette she felt she needed to just go lie down. Annette dropped her off. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Jacob didn't speak to anyone after the hearing. He walked out of the courthouse alone, eyes forward, face locked. Witnesses said he didn't wait for his lawyer or greet anyone from the church who had come to show support. He just got in his car and drove off. Inside that courtroom, everything had slipped away. His wife had cornered him with evidence. His mother had betrayed him in public. And the judge hadn't needed to say much. Jacob knew exactly where the case was headed. What hurt most wasn't the risk of losing his children. It was the way it happened, the embarrassment, the exposure, the quiet power his mother held over the room in just a few words. She had stripped him bare in front of strangers. And when she left the courtroom calmly, as if none of it had weighed on her, something in him cracked. By 6:40 p.m., his phone had stopped ringing. No texts, no messages. His legal team sent an email requesting follow-up documents. He didn't answer. He pulled into his mother's driveway without calling or knocking. She had just gotten home from the hearing, still in her courthouse clothes. The full timeline of what occurred inside Martha Reed's home that evening came to light during Jacob's post-arrest confession. Initially evasive, he eventually gave a version of events that left investigators shaken, not just for the violence involved, but for what had happened in the moments leading up to the murder. According to his own words, the confrontation started in the living room. Jacob accused Martha of betrayal, of siding with his ex-wife, of airing private family matters in court, and of trying to destroy his reputation. She, in turn, told him he needed to take responsibility for the mess he created. What followed wasn't just an argument. In the official report, investigators noted that Jacob admitted to losing control, saying a flood of emotion overcame him. But what he described next crossed a line no one expected. When pressed about signs of physical contact unrelated to the murder, Jacob hesitated, then confessed to initiating an act investigators would later classify as a sexual assault. He claimed the moment was emotional and that he was trying to feel powerful again after being broken down in court. Martha reportedly resisted, told him to stop, and physically tried to push him away. When she raised her voice and demanded that he leave, he lashed out violently. A broken vase was used to strike her. Once, then twice. She collapsed near the dining room table. The autopsy confirmed blunt trauma to the head and chest. There were no defensive wounds, only signs of a sudden, overwhelming assault. But it was what the forensics revealed in the physical exam that aligned with Jacob's confession and forced the case into a different category altogether. Detectives later stated that Jacob didn't seem fully aware of the weight of what he had done. He described the moment as something he couldn't control, and blamed stress, shame, and feeling cornered for what happened. But there was no justification. He didn't check for signs of life. He didn't call for help. He simply walked into the kitchen, grabbed a towel, and began wiping the floor. At 7:40 p.m., Jacob was still inside, hands stained, clothes soaked, and the body of his mother lying lifeless only feet away. What he didn't know was that someone had already called for help, and help was on the way. Annette Hightower couldn't explain the feeling. She had dropped Martha off at home earlier that evening after the court hearing. The two women had spoken briefly in the car, mostly about how draining the day had been. Martha hadn't seemed shaken. If anything, she appeared relieved. She told Annette she just wanted to rest. But a few hours later, as Annette sat in her own living room, something began to unsettle her. She couldn't focus. Her chest tightened. She later described it as a deep sense that something wasn't right. When she tried to shake it off, the feeling only got worse. At 7:32 p.m., Annette called 911. She told the dispatcher it might sound strange, but she needed someone to check on her friend. "Her son's not stable," she added. "He's been under pressure, and I need someone to make sure she's all right." Police arrived at the residence just minutes later. They knocked. No answer. Lights were on. One curtain had been pulled unevenly, as if someone had looked out and stepped away. After knocking again and announcing themselves, officers circled the perimeter. That's when they noticed the back door slightly ajar. What they saw inside left no question. Jacob Reed was still in the kitchen. The rag he'd been using was soaked in red, still clutched in his hand. Blood pooled along the floor and streaked across nearby tiles. His shoes were wet. Martha's body was motionless, partially covered by a dining cloth. She had not been moved from where she fell. Jacob froze when he saw the officers. He didn't argue. He didn't speak. He raised his hands slowly and was taken into custody without incident. Officers secured the home. Emergency services confirmed Martha Reed was deceased. The scene was preserved for forensic analysis, and within the hour, homicide detectives had been called in. Annette, still unaware of what had unfolded, received a call from the station just after 9 p.m. She broke down on the phone. According to a later report, she kept repeating the same phrase. "I just knew. I just knew." The arrest had been immediate. The evidence at the scene was overwhelming. But it was the days that followed that revealed the full weight of Jacob Reed's failure, starting with a sealed envelope tucked inside a drawer in Martha's bedroom. During the official search of the home, detectives found a folder labeled Final Documents. Inside it was a legally signed will, updated just 5 days before the custody hearing. It left everything, her house, savings, and personal assets, to her youngest son, Everett Reed, a quiet accountant living 2 hours away. Jacob's name was not mentioned anywhere in the document. He had been completely cut out. The will was clear. The witnesses were verified. The timing unshakable. Martha had already removed Jacob from her estate before stepping into court to testify against him. Her decision had nothing to do with the hearing itself. It was based solely on years of financial manipulation, lies, and the growing realization that Jacob had no intention of changing. In the statement she left with her attorney, she wrote, "This is not about love. It's about peace. I've made too many excuses for my son. I don't want my final years, or my memory, tied to more damage." Jacob never knew. Investigators believe he came to Martha's house that evening thinking her testimony had cost him everything, and that silencing her might give him time to repair his image, regain some control, maybe even access whatever was left in her name. But the truth is, there was nothing left for him to claim. Not legally, not emotionally, not even in memory. The murder hadn't stopped anything. It had only confirmed everything she feared. When Everett arrived to claim the body and review the documents, he signed without hesitation. According to a staff member at the funeral home, he said only one sentence: "She deserved to go out quiet." And that's exactly what happened. There was no public funeral, no church service, just a simple burial with a sealed headstone attended by 3 close friends and a lawyer. Jacob's name was never spoken. Everything he thought he'd gain was already gone before he ever picked up the weapon. The trial of Jacob Reed began less than 7 months after his arrest. Prosecutors built their case on direct evidence: the 911 welfare call, the scene photos, Jacob's confession, and forensic confirmation of what had taken place in the house. But beyond the crime itself, it was the coldness in Jacob's demeanor that disturbed nearly everyone involved. He didn't speak much in court. When shown photos of the scene, he looked down. When his confession was read aloud by the lead investigator, he showed no visible reaction. And when his mother's final will was presented as part of the prosecution's timeline, he blinked twice and stared forward, expressionless. Yvette testified briefly. She didn't detail the past, just confirmed Jacob's pattern of reckless decisions, and how Martha had feared he would eventually hurt someone. She kept her tone steady, her answers short. The focus, for her, was closure. Everett Reed, quiet and formal, was called to verify the will and speak to the state of the family before the crime. He told the court he hadn't spoken to Jacob in nearly 2 years prior to the murder. "We lived in different worlds," he said, "and Mom finally stopped trying to fix his." Then came Annette. Her voice shook as she described the call she made that night. Not because of something she heard, but something she felt. The courtroom fell still when she said, "I didn't save her. I just caught the end of it." The jury deliberated for just under 5 hours. Jacob was found guilty of second-degree murder, with aggravating factors. The sentence? 35 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole until the 30th year. The court deemed him a continuing threat, more for what he never showed than what he did. When asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Jacob declined. He stood up, adjusted his collar, and said nothing. No apology, no denial, not even a glance toward his remaining family. As the judge read out the final ruling, Jacob kept his eyes fixed on the floor. He walked out of the courtroom the same way he walked into his mother's house, silent, alone, and already too far gone. After the sentencing, the story of Jacob Reed quietly dissolved from public view. There were no major headlines, no official statements from the church he once led, just silence. The church board issued a single internal memo to members, confirming that the ministry would be dissolved, citing irreparable moral breach and leadership collapse. Within weeks, the building was closed. The congregation scattered. Yvette moved out of state with her children, leaving no forwarding details. Court records were sealed for the safety of the minors, and the address listed on the custody documents now points to a non-disclosure file. Close contacts later said she changed her surname, enrolled the children in a private school, and refused to speak publicly about the case. Her focus remained the same: protect her kids and never look back. Everett Reed finalized the estate transfer and took control of the property left behind. He buried his mother in a private plot and did not notify Jacob. The headstone inscription was simple: no family names, no scripture, just her name and dates. Annette Hightower was placed under grief observation. The 911 call she made saved the case, but not her peace of mind. Friends said she never fully recovered from the guilt of dropping Martha off that day. Jacob now serves his sentence in a medium-security state facility. He receives no visits, no mail, no recorded outside contact. For 35 years, he will sit in a system that doesn't care what his title used to be. And the children he claimed to fight for? They grow up with no memory of their father, no mention of him in bedtime stories, no photos on the walls. Just the quiet presence of a mother who decided that silence was safer than history. In the end, it wasn't the testimony that ruined Jacob Reed. It was the fact that, for the first time, someone finally told the truth. And this time, he couldn't control the ending. He lost his family. He lost his image. But when his own mother told the truth, he lost control. And in trying to silence her, he only proved everything she said was true. Now he's serving time, while the woman he tried to bury is the only reason his children were ever truly protected. If this case left you stunned, subscribe to True Crime Corner. Because some of the darkest crimes don't come from strangers. They come from the people who know you best.